I've been a nurse for 5 years, and at the time this happened, I was working at a small hospital in a rural town. It was one of those insane shifts, a 16-hour marathon full of emergencies, difficult patients, and the kind of exhaustion that makes your body feel like lead. It was early December, close to Christmas, so the roads were quiet, and the air had that damp smell of recent rain. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. The road I took was a secondary highway, surrounded by forest on both sides and barely any lighting. I remember playing a soft jazz playlist to keep myself awake while driving. The clock on the dashboard showed it was nearly midnight, and the fog was starting to cover the road like a thick, opaque blanket. It all began when I saw a pair of dim red lights in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes and slowed down, trying to make sense of what it was. A car had stopped right in the middle of the road, its hazard lights blinking faintly. From what I could see, it looked like an old sedan with dull paint and a dent on the side. My instinct was to stop and see if someone needed help. Nurses have this automatic habit of caring for others. I pulled over a little ahead of the car, grabbed my phone for the flashlight, and got out. As I approached, I saw a man in the driver's seat. He was sitting still, hands on the wheel, motionless. I tried calling out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" But he didn't respond. As I got closer, a strange chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. It was probably just someone in trouble, right? I knocked on the driver's side window, and that's when he finally moved. Slowly he turned his face toward me, but didn't roll down the window. His face seemed blank, expressionless, like he was in a trance. He had deep dark circles under his eyes, and an almost imperceptible smile that was unsettling. I tried to stay calm and asked again if he needed help. He simply pointed with his finger toward the car hood, still saying nothing. "Okay, I'll take a look," I said, trying to sound confident. Something about him felt off, but I thought maybe he was just in shock or as tired as I was. I walked over to the hood, using my phone's flashlight to see if I could spot the problem, but there was nothing obvious. The engine was closed, and aside from the dent on the side, the car looked fine. That's when I heard footsteps, coming from the woods beside the road. At first they were faint, like someone stepping on dry leaves, but then they became heavier and closer. My heart started pounding, and I turned quickly, shining my flashlight into the area. I couldn't see anything but the dense fog and the thick vegetation, but I knew something was there. I stepped back toward the car and looked at the driver again. He was staring at me now, with that same eerie smile, like he knew something I didn't. My mind started racing. Maybe it was just an animal, I thought, trying to convince myself everything was fine. But the footsteps continued, now circling around. I looked back at the driver, hoping for some reaction. Maybe he'd get out of the car to help or say something, but he just stayed there, motionless, with that unsettling smile frozen on his face. "Look, if it's not an emergency, I think you should wait for someone better equipped," I said, trying to wrap this up quickly. Before I could return to my car, I felt a presence behind me. This time, there weren't any footsteps, just the kind of silence that fills the air with tension, like the moment before a storm. My body froze, and I forced myself to turn around slowly. The flashlight on my phone illuminated something that was hard to process. It was a figure, human-shaped but too tall, too thin, with arms that stretched out like crooked tree branches. The fog made everything look even more surreal, but its eyes were impossible to miss. Bright, like two headlights, fixed directly on me. I was so terrified I could barely breathe. I managed to take 2 steps back before I tripped and almost fell. When I looked again, it had moved closer, almost gliding over the ground without making a sound. That's when I heard the car door open behind me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. The sound of the car door opening was like a trigger. I turned toward the driver, expecting him to finally say something, maybe explain what was happening. But what I saw made me freeze again. He was out of the car now, standing next to the open door, and something about him was wrong. His movements were too calculated, almost mechanical, and that unnerving smile had twisted into an even more disturbing expression. He began walking toward me, slowly, his footsteps completely silent on the asphalt. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped my phone, but somehow I managed to step back without taking my eyes off him. Then I noticed something that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. The figure I had seen in the fog was now standing right behind the driver. They didn't interact at all, but it was clear they were connected somehow. It was as if they shared some unspoken, sinister purpose that I couldn't understand. My only thought was to escape. Without thinking twice, I turned and ran toward my car. My legs felt heavy, like they were moving through quicksand, and the air seemed thicker, making it hard to breathe. I could hear footsteps behind me now, but I didn't dare look back. Every instinct I had told me that looking would be a fatal mistake. I reached my car in what felt like hours, though it had only been seconds. My hands were trembling so much that I struggled to open the door, but I finally managed to get in and lock everything as soon as I sat down. I started the engine automatically, not even checking the mirrors, and floored the accelerator, the tires slipping slightly on the wet road. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the two figures standing in the middle of the road, the fog beginning to swallow them up again. The driver still had that fixed smile on his face, and the other figure remained motionless, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. As I sped away, I started questioning everything. Maybe I had imagined it all. The exhaustion from the shift could have been playing tricks on my mind, but it all felt too real. The sounds, the faces, the sheer terror. My hands were slick with sweat, and I had to focus hard to keep control of the steering wheel. I decided not to go straight home. The idea of being followed, even by something I couldn't understand, was too much to bear. Instead, I drove to a police station about 15 minutes away, one that I knew would be open 24 hours. When I arrived, I parked and took a deep breath, trying to calm down before stepping out of the car. Inside the station, the place felt eerily quiet, as if time had stopped. There was only one officer sitting behind the desk, distracted by some paperwork. I walked up and explained everything that had happened, trying my best to sound rational. He listened, but the look on his face was one of disbelief, like he thought I was telling some far-fetched story. "You probably just got confused, ma'am. That road gets real foggy. People see things that aren't there all the time," he said, his tone dismissive. I insisted, describing the man, the car, and the figure in detail, but he just shook his head and suggested I go home and rest. Frustrated but somewhat relieved to be in a safe place, I left the station. I decided to take a different route home, even if it meant driving an extra 30 minutes. On the way back, my mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened. Who was that man? And that figure? Why did they seem connected but so detached from each other? When I finally got home, the adrenaline was still pumping, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my couch with all the lights on, trying to convince myself there was some logical explanation. A few days later, I was at a gas station near the start of that road. As I paid, I overheard two truck drivers talking about the car in the fog. I froze, listening intently. One of them said he had seen a car stopped on that same road years ago and had spotted something not human coming out of the woods. The other laughed nervously, dismissing it as superstition, but hearing that short story made my heart race. It wasn't just me. There was something on that road that shouldn't exist, and to this day, I avoid driving there. It was a Friday night, and my girlfriend Emily and I were driving back home after attending a friend's wedding about an hour away from our city. We were both tired, but in good spirits. Emily was laughing at some of the stories the groom shared during his speech, while I tried to keep my eyes on the seemingly endless road in the darkness. The radio played softly, tuned to a local jazz station, and the only light besides the headlights was the lonely moon hanging in the sky. Our routine was simple: work during the week, social events on the weekends. This trip was just another part of our schedule until something unexpected appeared in our path. A few miles before the exit to our city, a detour sign appeared out of nowhere. It was a simple, battered orange sign with an arrow pointing to the right. I didn't recall hearing about any scheduled road work, but I trusted it might be a last-minute closure. Emily thought it was strange, but I reassured her it was probably something minor, like a closed bridge or a pothole. When I turned in the direction the sign indicated, the main road quickly gave way to a worn asphalt path, flanked by vacant lots and abandoned warehouses. The silence around us grew so heavy that Emily instinctively turned down the radio. I should have turned back at that moment, but trusting the signs, I kept driving. As we followed the deserted streets, more detour signs appeared, all equally worn, and pointing us through a labyrinth of roads I had never seen before. Emily began to fidget. She kept looking out the window, her face tense, her eyes fixed on the darkness outside, muttering that something about this felt wrong. I tried to stay calm, but sweat was already running down my back. The GPS on my phone showed nothing but a blank gray screen. No signal. "We must be close to getting back on the main road," I murmured, trying to sound confident, though my voice wavered. Emily didn't respond, just leaned forward, gripping her seatbelt like she was bracing for something bad. Then, out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just another driver who had been rerouted like us, but something about the way the car moved felt off. It wasn't keeping a normal distance. It sped up and got uncomfortably close to our bumper. When I turned down another street, it followed, matching our every move. Emily noticed and whispered, almost panicked, "I think they're following us." My heart raced. I pressed the accelerator, but the narrow, winding road made it hard to gain any real speed. The headlights behind us started flashing intermittently, almost like a warning. There were no houses, no people, no sign of help anywhere. Just us and that car. The tension inside the car was suffocating. Emily was clutching the edge of her seat, glancing back every few seconds, while I gripped the steering wheel tightly. The road seemed to narrow with every turn, flanked by graffiti-covered walls and crumbling warehouses. That's when the car behind us started honking, loud and sharp, the sound echoing through the silence. I didn't know what to do. Should I slow down and try to talk to them? Keep driving and hope they gave up? My gut told me stopping wasn't an option, so I kept going, even though my mind was racing in 100 directions. After a few tense minutes, we reached an intersection, and that's when I realized there were no more detour signs. It was as if they had led us here deliberately. The road ended in a dead end, surrounded by rusted gates and piles of scrap metal. "It's a trap!" Emily shouted, her voice shaking with fear. Before I could react, the car behind us turned off its headlights and stopped in the middle of the street, blocking our way back. Everything went eerily quiet. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the distant creak of metal swaying in the wind. That's when Emily grabbed my arm and pointed outside. "Someone's getting out of the car!" A man stepped out of the car, and even in the dim moonlight, something about him felt off. He was tall and thin, wearing a long coat that swayed slightly in the wind. His face was hidden by the shadow of his hood, but I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. Maybe a knife, or worse. Emily was panicking now, whispering through clenched teeth for me to do something. "Reverse! We need to get out of here!" But my hands were shaking so badly on the wheel that I couldn't decide whether to try squeezing past their car or ram the rusty gate in front of us. The man started walking toward us, his steps slow and deliberate, like he knew we had nowhere to go. That's when Emily, in a burst of desperation or courage, began rummaging through the car. She grabbed a flashlight we had left in the glove compartment from a previous trip and switched it on, pointing the beam directly at the man. He stopped abruptly, raising a hand to shield his eyes. For a brief moment I thought this might give us the advantage we needed. I slammed the accelerator and threw the car into reverse, trying to angle the vehicle toward the left to escape. But then I heard footsteps from the opposite side. It wasn't just him. There was someone else. My heart felt like it was going to explode as I glanced at the side mirror and saw another figure emerge from the shadows. This time, it was a woman. She was shorter but moved quickly with a determined stride. She wore something that looked like an old uniform, which made her presence even more unsettling. Emily's flashlight trembled in her hands as she tried to illuminate both of them at once, but it was no use. The woman was closing in from the right, the man was still advancing from the front, and we were completely surrounded. "We're screwed," I muttered under my breath as Emily desperately searched the glove compartment again, as if she could find something, anything, to save us. Then, in a moment of sheer desperation, I floored the gas pedal and yanked the wheel hard to the side, aiming for a narrow gap between their car and the wall of the dead end. The sound of metal scraping against concrete was deafening, and Emily let out a muffled scream. I didn't know if we'd make it, but I kept my foot on the pedal, feeling the car jolt violently. When we finally broke free of the tight space, I glanced in the rear-view mirror. The man and the woman were standing still, watching us. They didn't run after us, didn't try to stop us. They just stood there, motionless, their silhouettes outlined by the moonlight. Their calmness scared me more than anything else that had happened. After escaping that dead end, I drove aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to find our way back to the main road. Emily was in shock, breathing heavily and muttering almost in a trance. They were waiting for us. They knew we'd come through here. I couldn't disagree. Those detour signs, the desolate location, it all felt meticulously planned. When we finally found a wider road, I slowed down, and Emily managed to use her phone to call the police. As she explained what happened, I realized my hands were so sweaty that I could barely keep a grip on the steering wheel. Every sound, every shadow along the road made my heart race, as if those two could appear at any moment. When we got home, it was nearly 3 a.m. But neither of us could sleep. The police promised to send a patrol to check out the area, but they didn't seem too convinced by our story. "It's probably just vandals or people trying to scare drivers," the dispatcher said before hanging up. That didn't make sense. Who would go to such lengths just to scare someone? All night Emily sat by the window as if expecting to see those headlights again. I felt useless, unable to protect her from something I didn't even understand. The next morning I decided to go back to the area alone. Emily begged me not to, but I felt like I needed answers. I needed to see for myself if it was all just a bizarre coincidence or some kind of elaborate prank. I retraced the route, my chest tightening with every turn. In the daylight, the place felt entirely different. The narrow road and abandoned warehouses seemed less threatening, more run down than menacing. When I reached the dead end, I parked and got out of the car. The detour signs were gone. There was no sign of any recent activity. The ground was covered in dry leaves and rusted scraps of metal, as if no one had been there in months. But then I noticed something that froze me in place. A long, deep scratch on the rusty gate at the end of the alley. The exact spot where my car had scraped during our escape. It wasn't my imagination. It really happened. The silence around me felt heavy, almost oppressive, as I searched for any other clues. That's when I noticed the footprints. Not just a few, several sets of them, some small, some large, all leading to the center of the dead end. Like multiple people had been standing there, waiting. As I stared at those footprints, a chill ran down my spine. They looked fresh, the kind of fresh that should have been washed away by the light rain that fell earlier that morning. I tried to shake off the growing dread and decided to leave before anything, or anyone, showed up. As I got back into the car, I felt that uncomfortable sensation of being watched. I glanced in the mirrors, then out the windows, but there was no one there. Still, the feeling lingered, crawling under my skin. On the drive home, Emily called me. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with urgency. "You need to come back now. There's something here." My stomach dropped. I asked what was going on, but she just repeated that someone had left something at our door and hung up. When I arrived, she was sitting in the living room, pale, holding a small wooden box with a look of fear and confusion. "This was on the doormat. There was no one there." Carefully, I opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small metallic object, a rusty old key. The paper had just one sentence written on it: "You were warned." I stood there for a few seconds, holding the paper and trying to process what was happening. Emily was staring at me, waiting for me to say something, but I had no answers. I picked up the key and examined it closely. It was heavy, made of iron, with rust and handcrafted details that looked ancient. None of this made any sense. Warned about what? What did they want from us? Emily suggested throwing the box away and forgetting about it, but I couldn't. Something inside me wouldn't let it go. It felt like I needed to know what the key opened, even though every instinct in me screamed to drop it and walk away. We decided to lock all the doors and windows and try to go about our day as normally as possible, but the tension was unbearable. Emily refused to be alone in any room, and I couldn't stop staring at the box. Then, as night fell, we heard it, a noise outside. It was sharp and repetitive, like someone was throwing pebbles at the living room window. When I peeked through the curtain, my heart nearly stopped. Standing in the middle of the street, under the glow of a street lamp, was the man from the previous night. The same long coat, the same hood. But this time, he wasn't alone. 3 more people stood with him, arranged in a circle, as if deliberately staking out our house, and they were all staring directly at us. Emily panicked. She ran to the bedroom, frantically searching for her phone, but I knew calling the police would be pointless. These people weren't there by accident. They knew where we lived. They knew we were home. "They're not going to stop," Emily whispered when she came back to the living room, her face pale as a sheet. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to open the door and confront them, but the fear that this was exactly what they wanted kept me frozen. Then, as if they knew we were watching, one of them stepped forward. It was the woman. She raised her hand slowly and pointed directly at the box still sitting on the table. "You think that's it?" I asked Emily, my voice trembling. "You think they want the key back?" She didn't answer, just looked at me as if I held the solution that would save us. Without thinking too much, I grabbed the box and the key, opened the door a crack, and threw them outside. The lid of the box flipped open as it landed, and the key slid to the woman's feet. For a moment, no one moved. Then she bent down, picked up the key, and looked straight at me. Even from a distance, I could feel the intensity of her gaze. Without saying a word, the 4 of them turned and disappeared into the darkness, their footsteps fading away. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Emily rushed over, still shaking. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to say yes, that we were safe now, but I couldn't. Something about that final exchange left me uneasy. It wasn't just the woman's stare. It was the silence, the precision of their movements, as if everything had been rehearsed. The rest of the night passed in unbearable tension. Every noise, every shadow outside felt like a new threat. But by morning, the world seemed normal. No sign of the 4 figures, no message, nothing. The following days were quiet, but the fear didn't leave us. Emily insisted that we move, and I agreed. There was no way we could keep living in that house after what happened. but something kept gnawing at me. On the day of the move, as we loaded the last boxes into the truck, I noticed something on the porch. It was a small piece of paper folded neatly. My instincts told me not to touch it, but curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded the note, and once again it contained a single sentence, written in the same hurried handwriting. "It's not over yet." My vision darkened for a moment, and a chill ran down my spine. To this day, I've never seen them again, but I can't shake the feeling that they're just waiting for the right time to come back. Driving a truck was never exactly a dream of mine, but it paid the bills. Back in 2019, I was 36 years old, freshly divorced, and trying to adapt to life on the road. That night, I had just finished a delivery in a small town in Iowa. It was past 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted. I decided to stop at a rest stop I knew well, a simple place with about 4 or 5 truck spaces and a restroom that smelled like pine, but at least it was clean. It was the kind of spot you stop at only because you know there won't be a better option for at least 60 miles. When I parked, I noticed another truck in the far corner, and a black car, an old sedan, slightly dented, parked 2 spots ahead. Nothing too unusual. I turned off the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out to do my routine walk-around check of the truck before settling in for the night. The beam of my flashlight swept across the tires and the body as I walked, listening to the nighttime sounds. Crickets, the distant hum of engines on the highway, and the wind rustling through the dry trees surrounding the lot. That's when I noticed something strange. The black car was empty. There was no one in the driver's seat or the passenger seat, and the windows were wide open. In the middle of winter, who leaves their car like that? A shiver ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe the driver was in the restroom or walking around. I continued my check, but something about the atmosphere felt off. You know when the air around you feels heavy, like someone's watching you? Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. When I finished checking the driver's side, I heard a faint sound from the back of the truck. It was muffled, like footsteps dragging on the pavement. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Even so, my flashlight shook slightly in my hand as I moved toward the sound. When I got there, I looked around but saw nothing. Just the dark parking lot, the shadows cast by the dim streetlights, and the black car still motionless, like it didn't belong there. But then, as I turned to head back to the cab, I swear I saw something move in the shadows near my rear bumper. My body froze. I tried to focus the flashlight, but whatever it was disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I decided to get into the cab and lock the doors, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Before climbing up, I took one last look around, trying to figure out what was bothering me so much. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Fresh footprints on the pavement near the back of the truck, leading toward the passenger side. They were small, like those of someone barefoot. It was the kind of detail that made adrenaline surge through me. My gut told me to get in the truck and drive away, but at the same time, I felt the need to make sure no one was hiding there. Maybe it was an animal, a lost kid, or just my mind playing tricks on me. I grabbed a tire iron from the tool compartment and walked cautiously to the passenger side, my heart pounding in my chest. My flashlight scanned the ground as I approached, and that's when I noticed something even stranger. The footprints stopped right next to the truck, but there was no sign of anyone. No movement. No sound. The tire iron was clenched tightly in my hand, and the silence around me felt deafening. All I could hear was the wind and the faint hum of the nearest streetlight. I took a few steps around the truck, trying to gather the courage to look underneath, but there was something deeply wrong with the silence. It was like the whole world had stopped breathing. I took a deep breath, crouched down, and shone the light under the truck. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the sensation of being watched only grew stronger. When I stood back up, it was as if the air around me had become thicker, almost suffocating. I turned quickly, half expecting to find someone standing there, but the lot was empty. Just me, my truck, and the black car. That's when I noticed something that froze me in place. The passenger door of my truck was slightly open. I was certain I had locked all the doors before stepping out. I ran to the cab, shining my flashlight around, and pushed the door fully open. The cab looked empty at first glance, but something was off. My hat, which I always kept hanging on the back of the seat, was now on the floor. My backpack had been turned over, the zippers open, like someone had gone through it. At that moment, the idea of being alone wasn't an option anymore. My breathing was heavy as I inspected the cab with the flashlight. There was no sign of anyone, but every corner felt like it was hiding something invisible, something ready to jump out at any moment. "It's fine, calm down, there's no one here," I whispered to myself, trying to keep it together. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I climbed into the truck and locked the doors again, this time pressing them hard as if that could protect me. I started the engine and left the headlights on, illuminating the empty parking lot. I was about to shift into gear and leave when movement caught my eye. In the side mirror, I saw something moving toward the black car. It was a low, crouched figure, but before I could focus properly, it disappeared into the shadows. I knew I should leave, but curiosity was eating away at me. It was like something was calling me to understand what was happening. I pulled out my phone and quickly snapped a photo of the black car, zooming in to get a better look. Nothing was visible at first, but in the reflection of the back window, something seemed wrong. There was a shape, a shadow that shouldn't have been there, as if someone was inside the car, turned away from the seat. My stomach twisted into a knot, and my hands were so sweaty that I nearly dropped my phone. I decided I'd seen enough. It was time to leave before things got any worse. I turned on the high beams and began maneuvering to leave the lot, but as I did, a sudden urgency stopped me. Something was preventing me from just driving away. As I maneuvered, I heard a sharp sound from the back of the truck. It was a dry thud, like someone had hit the metal. I slammed the brakes immediately and looked in the mirrors, but I didn't see anything. The engine idled low, and the cab felt tighter than ever. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by what sounded like long scratches. I rolled the window down just enough to hear better, and that's when a strange noise reached my ears. A low, irregular laugh, almost childlike, but completely devoid of emotion, as if someone was imitating a child. The sound was coming from the back of the truck, near the rear bumper. I was terrified, but something inside me insisted I needed to see what it was. I grabbed the tire iron again and stepped out, my legs trembling so much I could barely plant my feet on the ground. My focus was on the back of the truck, but as I started walking in that direction, something caught my eye at the black car. The windows were still open, but now something was hanging from the driver's side door. It looked like a rag or a bag, but when I shone the flashlight on it, I realized it was something far worse. It was an old, dirty jacket. But what truly froze my blood was the fact that I recognized that jacket. It was the same one I'd left in my truck cab minutes earlier. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. How had that jacket gotten there? My mind raced, trying to come up with logical explanations, but none of them made sense. Had someone broken into the truck while I was distracted? But how, when I had locked everything? I took a step toward the black car, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I heard a muffled sound coming from inside the car, like heavy breathing or a low sigh. The feeling of being watched returned in full force, like the darkness itself had eyes. Despite the rising panic, I couldn't help myself. I moved closer, shining the light into the car's interior, but what I saw inside was worse than anything I could have imagined. In the back seat, there was a figure crouched down. I couldn't make out its face because it was turned away, knees drawn to its chest, arms wrapped around its legs, like someone trying to hide or protect themselves. The figure was completely still, but its presence felt fundamentally wrong. I tried to speak, my voice trembling. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. Just the sound of my own breathing echoing in the silence. The thing didn't move, didn't react. But something about its presence triggered an instinctive, almost primal fear. It was like my body knew what my mind hadn't yet processed. This wasn't human. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs felt glued to the ground. The beam of my flashlight flickered, illuminating the figure for seconds that felt like an eternity. That's when something absolutely terrifying happened. The figure began to move. Not in a natural way, but as if every joint was dislocated, bending at impossible angles. It turned slowly, and at that moment, my blood ran cold. There was no face. Where its eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, cold like wax. Even without eyes, I knew it was staring straight at me, boring into my soul. I didn't think twice. I took a step back, nearly tripping, and ran for the truck. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors again, and started the engine with shaking hands. The headlights illuminated the black car, but now the figure was gone. I scanned the lot in every direction, but it was empty again, as if nothing had happened. Then I felt something I will never forget. A presence behind me, inside the cab. It was as if the air had changed, turning cold and heavy. I froze, too afraid to check the rearview mirror. But for some reason, I turned slowly. And there it was, sitting in the passenger seat, completely still, with that featureless face turned toward me. I almost passed out from pure terror. The air in the cab felt sucked out, and every fiber of my being screamed to get out. Without thinking, I floored the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward with a jolt, tires screeching on the asphalt, but I had no idea where I was going. I just wanted to get away. My eyes stayed glued to the road ahead, trying to ignore the motionless presence in the passenger seat. But I couldn't ignore it for long. The cab was freezing, and the silence was so thick I could hear my own ragged breathing. Finally, I glanced to the side. The seat was empty. The relief was immediate, but it lasted only a second. A horrible sound, like nails scraping metal, came from the back of the cab. I looked in the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. The figure was there, outside the cab, clinging to the back of the truck. Its movements were impossible, as if it were climbing against the wind at 60 miles/hour, its body contorting unnaturally. The road ahead seemed endless, and I had no idea what to do. I tried speeding up, but it stayed there, inching closer and closer. The sound of the scratching was deafening, and the only thought in my head was, "I'm not getting out of this alive." In a panic, I started honking the horn frantically, hoping to attract attention, hoping someone on the road would see what was happening. But the highway was deserted, just me and that thing clinging to my truck. My hands were shaking so much I nearly lost control of the wheel. The sound of the scratching grew louder, and then I remembered the most obvious tool at my disposal: the brakes. I slammed the pedal hard, and the truck jerked violently, tires screeching against the pavement. I heard a loud thud from the back, like something had hit the metal hard. I took a deep breath and checked the rearview mirror, praying that whatever it was had fallen off. But what I saw nearly made me lose control again. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, completely still, staring at me. Even without a face, it was like I could feel its rage, a hatred that seemed to poison the air around it. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I released the brakes and floored the gas, leaving it behind. My headlights illuminated its silhouette for a few seconds before it vanished into the darkness. My mind was in chaos, but one thing was clear. I needed to get off that road as soon as possible. I drove for over an hour without stopping, ignoring the exhaustion and the terror that pulsed through every muscle in my body. The road seemed endless, but finally I saw the lights of a gas station. It wasn't much different from the rest stop where it all started, but it felt like an oasis in the desert. I parked the truck haphazardly and jumped out, still clutching the tire iron like it was a weapon. I looked around, searching for any signs of what had chased me. Nothing. Just the sound of the truck's engine and the fluorescent lights of the station. I entered the small convenience store, where the clerk, a thin man with glasses, who looked like he'd seen it all, gave me a curious look. "You okay, man?" he asked, noticing my state. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled, like my mind was still trapped in the terror of that night. He listened silently, but his expression changed when I mentioned the black car. "You're not the first to say something like this," he said, lowering his voice. "I've heard stories from other truckers seeing weird stuff on this stretch of highway. Nobody knows what it is, but the best thing you can do is keep moving and never stop here again." I left the gas station soon after, not daring to look back. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. What was that thing? How did it get into my truck? All I know is that I've never driven down that highway again. Sometimes I still dream of the black car parked in the darkness, its windows wide open. And in all those dreams I feel like I'm being watched, even when I can't see anyone. I'm a high school literature teacher in a small town. This happened about 4 years ago, on a Friday night when I stayed late grading papers. I remember being exhausted, just wanting to get home, take a hot shower, and sleep. My routine was simple: work, home, and occasionally dinner with friends. I lived alone in a rented house on the outskirts of town, so the drive back was always long and quiet, especially at night. The last stretch of the route was on a deserted road surrounded by trees and dark fields, and that night the silence felt heavier than usual. I was halfway down that lonely road when I saw the high beams in my rearview mirror for the first time. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just an impatient driver wanting me to go faster. But I was already doing about 50 km/h, a little over the speed limit. I kept driving, trying to ignore it, but the lights kept flashing, more insistent each time. That creeping feeling of unease started to build in my chest. Something didn't feel right. The road was completely empty, no other cars in sight, and I began to wonder why someone would be so desperate to get my attention in such an isolated place. I decided to slow down a bit to see if the car would pass me, but instead, it slowed down with me. That only made everything feel more unsettling. The driver kept flashing their high beams in a chaotic, almost frantic pattern, as if they were trying to tell me something urgent. I tried to convince myself it was a teenager messing around or maybe someone needing help, but a darker part of me started imagining something worse. Stories of highway robberies and ambushes in remote areas flashed through my mind, and the thought of stopping made me feel sick. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely think. As the high beams flashed again, they lit up the inside of my car through the rearview mirror. For a split second I thought I saw movement in the back seat. I glanced quickly at the mirror, trying to stay casual, but I didn't see anything. My mind started racing with absurd scenarios, but it was late, and I was tired. It could have been nothing. Still, I locked my car doors and kept driving, my attention darting between the road ahead and the mirror behind me. The car behind me didn't let up, and the fear in my chest turned into a cold, sinking dread. I had to decide what to do. A few minutes later, I saw a small pull-off area up ahead, dimly lit by one of those weak yellow streetlights. I decided I'd stop there. If this was someone trying to scare me or a crazy driver, at least I'd be in a semi-lit area to handle the situation. As I pulled over, the car behind me slammed to a stop, blocking any chance of escape. I watched through the mirror, trying to see who would get out, but the dim light didn't help much. All I could make out was the silhouette of someone tall, moving quickly toward my car. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, ready to call 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Then the man started banging on my window frantically, pointing at my car and motioning for me to get out. I rolled the window down just a crack, enough to hear what he was saying. "There's someone in your back seat," he shouted, his voice raw and trembling. His words froze me in place. My entire body locked up, and the thought of turning around to look felt impossible. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and what I saw almost made me faint. A shadow. A distorted figure hunched down as if it was hiding right behind my seat. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I threw open the door and practically stumbled out onto the asphalt. The man, still beside my car, grabbed my arm and pulled me behind him as if to shield me. For a second I thought this was all some kind of trap, but the look on his face was pure terror. "Run!" he yelled, his voice breaking, while pointing toward my car. I didn't stop to think or question. My legs took off, and I sprinted toward the pull-off area, where there was an old, abandoned phone booth. When I turned back to look at the car, the passenger door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. The man stood frozen, staring into the vehicle but not getting any closer. I screamed at him to get away, but he seemed paralyzed. Then something happened that I'll never forget. A figure emerged from the car. It wasn't human. It was tall, with elongated limbs and movements that were somewhere between a glide and a stumble. It stood under the weak yellow light for just a moment before disappearing into the darkness of the road, swallowed by the night. My entire body was trembling, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. After the figure vanished, the man finally ran toward me. He was out of breath, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Did you see that?" he asked, as if he needed confirmation to believe what had just happened. All I could do was nod. My body was still frozen, and my hands were trembling so much that I could barely hold my phone. He insisted we call the police, but the idea of explaining this to anyone felt ridiculous. Who would believe something like that? Still, I dialed with shaking fingers while he kept his eyes glued to the road, as if expecting the thing to come back. The police arrived in less than 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. I couldn't bring myself to get back in my car, so I sat on the edge of the road, hugging my knees, while the man tried to explain the situation to the officers. They inspected the car with flashlights but found nothing. No signs of anyone being inside or anything unusual. One of the officers looked at me with that skeptical expression, the kind they reserve for people they think are paranoid or making things up. "Are you sure you saw someone?" he asked, with the tone of someone who already doubted my answer. But I knew what I saw, and so did the man. After the police left, I couldn't imagine driving home alone. The man, who introduced himself as John, offered to drive me home. I hesitated for a moment. After all, just minutes earlier, he had been the scary guy flashing his high beams at me. But the idea of driving alone on that road was unbearable. I agreed, and he insisted on following my car closely to make sure I got home safely. It was the only way I could muster the courage to get back behind the wheel. The drive home was a blur, and my mind kept replaying the image of that distorted figure. When I finally got home, John waited until I was safely inside before leaving. I locked every door and window and spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch with all the lights on. The fear was so overwhelming that it felt like something was still out there, watching me. In the days that followed, I avoided driving at night and started seeing a therapist to cope with what had happened. To this day, I don't know what that thing was. Maybe it was an intruder, something supernatural, or even a manifestation of my own exhaustion and paranoia. But what haunts me most is that John saw it too, because if he saw it, then it wasn't just in my head.